It is a life sentence with no possibility of parole for the Prescott husband and father who buried his wife alive 7 years ago.
Just before his trial started, David Pagliano pleaded guilty for the 2017 murder of his wife. And tonight, one of the lead detectives on this case revealing more in an exclusive interview. True crime correspondent Brianna Whitney got that interview for us.
Yeah, this is such an unusual case, and it is so sad. As far as homicides go, this one is particularly heinous and rare. Detectives believe Sandra Pagliano was alive and suffered in a grave before she died. One of the lead detectives says, though there is some comfort in justice, this crime is impossible to process and impossible to forget. Replaying what happened to Sandra Pagliano is a painful thought for the detective who stood at the crime scene this time not long ago.
We believe that it happened overnight 7 years ago today in the early hours.
Yavapai County Sheriff Sergeant Jack Maddox says it all began when Sandra Pagliano went missing from her Prescott home while her young kids and husband, David Pagliano, were inside.
She had supposedly just left or disappeared, but he still was not calling in the report.
Instead, one of Sandra's friends called in a missing persons report, saying it was completely out of character for her to willingly leave. A mother very involved in her kids' lives and with the community. David showed police 2 notes reportedly handwritten and left behind by Sandra. One to her kids saying she had to leave, and the other to David, leaving him all of her property and belongings.
The handwriting analysis showed that those notes were in fact written by him.
With David as a person of interest, Maddox says they gathered enough cell phone evidence that put him in the place Sandra Pagliano's body would ultimately be found, in a hand-dug grave.
She was also bound around the mouth and around the head so that she would presumably be unable to make any noise. She was alive at the time that she was buried.
Horrifically, evidence showed she was likely conscious for up to 5 minutes after she was buried. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office charged David Pagliano with first-degree murder, and the county attorney was pursuing the death penalty. But on the eve of his trial, David decided to plead guilty and let the judge decide his fate. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Detective Maddox believes avoiding trial may protect their kids from more harm. He says they were 8 and 12 years old at the time their mother was killed.
It spares all of them having to relive all of those details.
Maddox says while justice is finally served, there are certain cases that stick with you forever. For him, this is one of them.
There are things that you experience that you think you'd never be able to experience something worse, and then along comes something like this.
In addition to the life sentence, David Pagliano was also sentenced to an additional 16.5 years in prison for kidnapping Sandra, forging those notes, and fraud schemes. He will die behind bars, no parole.
Disturbing case. Why did it take so long to get a conviction 7 years later?
I don't know. I don't know what the delay was in that time frame. Justice system was slow. Obviously, we had COVID that had delays in every county around here, but I don't know why it took that long to get to trial. And then, of course, they prepare for trial, right? And a first-degree murder trial is always the hardest to prepare for. It typically takes years. There's so much evidence to go through, a lot of witnesses to interview, and they get there with all that work, and then he decides to take the plea deal the night before that trial began. That's pretty rare. Usually there's a decision made before that.
And you said the lawyers think this is the best move to avoid a trial for the kids, but they're what, 15 and 19 years old? They know exactly what's going on here.
They should be now, yeah. These ages are just awful because they were young but old enough to know.
Yeah,
and
so now they know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think in looking at, death penalty versus not, that sergeant was saying, well, a trial they would have had to reopen and relive those wounds, but also they already lost one parent. If there's any sort of relationship to be had with him and these kids, he will be in prison to do so. So
just a terrible situation.
Oh my gosh, but buried alive, that's the first time I've ever covered something like that.
Yeah, and then still alive 5 minutes afterwards. Just can't get any worse than that, for sure. Brianna, thank you.